So Warcraft's 30th anniversary direct hit our screens last Wednesday. It's just over a week ago, depending on when I get this out. Might be a bit later than that, depending on how long it takes me to get all these lovely edits done for you. And as brief as it was, we did have a lot of info chucked our way. Some exciting, some very unique, some very much expected, and some extremely overdue, yet very welcome nevertheless. I actually dropped a video a mere 24 hours before the event dropped with my own predictions. Some are right, some not so much. But one in particular, despite not actually getting announced technically, still seems to have been right on the money, but we'll get to that. But now that we've been given the announcements and enough time has passed for the dust to settle and certain aspects of the reveals have been somewhat elaborated on, I thought now would be a good time just to do a little debrief and unpack it all. Now, like I said, it was a relatively short event, which seemed a little rushed, with the remainder of the slot just filled out by the concert, which, don't get me wrong, was phenomenal. As a musician myself, I always do appreciate seeing ones who are absolutely top of their game performing beloved tracks from my childhood. But man, I really did want to deep dive immediately afterwards. But unfortunately, this formula is something that didn't carry over onto their Diet Coke remote version of BlizzCon. But on the bright side, that gives you and me a lot to discuss and speculate on. Not only in terms of what Blizzard did show us, but also in terms of what they didn't. And in terms of retail WoW, what the roadmap heavily implies that we're going to get. So what can we take away from Warcraft's 30th anniversary direct? Well, let's get straight into it, shall we? So Blizzard kicked off the event with the remastered version of the Warcraft original trilogy. So Warcraft 2 actually was my first prediction. Of course, you didn't exactly need to be Mystic Meg to have got that one right, as we did have artwork leaked ahead of the event. And based on the screenshot we saw of a 2.0 build of Warcraft 3 being added to the PTR, I did wonder if this meant a second attempt to get it right, which did indeed turn out to be the case. Blizzard fully acknowledged and took responsibility for the awful state Warcraft 3 had been released in and vowed to give it a second go, doing it right this time, so, W. And as much as I joked about they might as well chuck in Warcraft 1 as well at that point, I mean, hey, at that point, you might as well fucking chuck Warcraft 1 in there as well. Well, that's exactly what they did. Although at that point, we might need a bit more than a lick of paint and probably a whole new remake. Well, they certainly showed me. Hearthstone then got a StarCraft crossover and Warcraft Rumble's coming to PC. I'm not going to elaborate too much on that, but yeah, there you go. So next up, we got classic news. We got confirmation of a new phase of Season of Discovery, which will bring Nax as expected and also bring us new instance content involving the Scarlet Crusade that looks like it's set in the Eastern Plaguelands, which sounds sweet as fuck. As well as some in Deadwind Pass, so does that mean a classic take on Karazhan's on the horizon? Who knows? WoW Classic 20th Anniversary servers were announced, offering fresh start servers for Classic Era and Hardcore, which we had a feeling was coming based on certain strategic decisions made by a certain famous Classic guild. With Fresh Start Burning Crusade coming at the end of 2025. Now, a lot of people seem to immediately jump to the conclusion that this meant a Burning Crusade Hardcore, and if you were one of those hopeful few, I'm sorry to burst your bubble, it ain't happening. Blizzard was quick to confirm after the event that Hardcore doesn't fit their vision for Burning Crusade, and as much as I agree with them on a personal level, as in just by not being that much of a masochist, if you have a contingent of players who love getting fucked over even harder than they were before, then just let them. I mean, as if the notion of losing your level 60 character with full raid buffs and Nax wasn't bad enough, envision the playtime already spent to get to that point, and then add the journey from 60 to 70 in Outland on top of that, blasting through every Burning Crusade raid there is, defeating Illidan in Black Temple, getting maybe even a Warglaive or two, and then to end it all accidentally falling off some platform in Shattrath. The thought of that hypothetical scenario alone is enough to make me want to just uninstall the game, sell my PC and move to a rural farm town and become Amish. But if some of you sick fucks want to inflict that amount of torture upon yourselves, then frankly Blizzard should just let you. And as we all assume, Mob Classic was confirmed to be coming and dropped summer 2025, so that does mean, in fact, as I referenced in the past video, that Warlock who famously ninja'd the corrupted Ashbringer off of Stay Safe, with the sole reasoning that when Mob Classic came around he'd finally be able to let his summon demon equip it as a transmog, will finally be able to actually in fact do that. So, does anyone know if this guy streams? I want to see the moment he does it. I want to have been there for it. However, if you were holding out any hope for a Classic Plus or anything remotely like that, it would have been a disappointing evening for you. Now, there was a clip that came out a while ago during an interview with Tim Jones, one of the devs of Season of Discovery, which I actually hadn't seen before I dropped the prediction video.
Basically, are there any plans to maybe do something like this with Classic going forward? Maybe called Classic Plus or, something like that?
Well, we're definitely not going to announce anything. That's not... I think the community just needs to reflect on what we're doing as a team and try to think about why we're doing it. Why do we have an experimental seasonal server like Season of Discovery? Why are we trying out vastly different types of raid designs? Why are we creating brand new tier sets and trying to make classes that were vastly underrepresented more represented and enjoyable. Without saying anything, I think people can maybe infer a lot of stuff.
And as tight-lipped and cryptic as he's being here, he does seem to be, by doing everything except just saying it, confirming the notion that the main job of Season of Discovery is to act as both a canvas for Blizzard to test out wacky ventures in Classic, but also it being a sort of alpha phase to gauge feedback that would be used in the development of a future Classic, perhaps a Classic Plus. So perhaps assuming that enough data had already been collated from Season of Discovery, you had a lot of players hoping for this announcement to finally come in a less cryptic way on Wednesday. Unfortunately, it was not to be. However, does this mean that Classic Plus isn't coming and Tim Jones's very suggestive implications shouldn't be given any credibility at all? Nah, not at all. Season of Discovery, as made clear by Blizzard, was always going to go through all the phases of vanilla, and it hasn't done that yet, and as we just found out on Wednesday, it's going to do exactly that by finishing up with Nax, and bonus instanced content along with it. So once this phase is over, well, where would you go after that? This is the point that I genuinely believe Classic players will finally get their alternate timeline, which brings us into Classic Plus. Because I mean, the other alternative, it's just going to Burning Crusade, and I don't think players want that, nor do I think Blizzard want to do that either. So I think we're maybe one phase away from finally getting that Classic Plus announcement. But hey, if not, you can just do what the OnlyFans lot are doing and run the vanilla experience again on the exact same class for the 146th time on the fresh servers. Next up, we got the long-awaited reveal of 11.1. And what I said in the prediction video, expect a very goblin-themed tier. Well, man, I didn't quite realise how right I'd be on that. 11.1 turned out to be the most goblin-centric content the game has probably ever seen. And to be honest, a direction that is one of the more seldom visited themes. This sort of urban setting with goblin architecture is rarely seen, and apart from those good old days in BFA of trying not to pull the entire dungeon in Motherlode, it's a type of environment you would never really see unless you actually created a goblin and dropped in the Kazan, I don't know, either one. And man, as wacky as it is, there are no complaints here, believe me. Because as a result, we are getting one of the most interestingly unique, vibrant looking areas we've got in a long time. Even the patch logo looks so cool and unique, like love has gone into it. The raid, Liberation of Undermined, sees us storming the Galagio, to face off with Gallywix himself. And if you'd told me this with no context, that we're storming a Vegas Strip style casino with our squad, I'd have bet money on that being a Black Ops campaign mission and not a WoW raid. And at one point along the way, heading to this Demolition Derby-esque arena to deal with the robotic remake of Godzilla vs. Kong, which at first glance makes me wonder if that'll open opportunities to introduce hacker-tinker raid mechanics, a bit like the Mechatalk fight during Battle for Zara Law, which proved really enjoyable for me. I loved yelling out colours at my guildies on Discord, which was really a lot more fun than I thought it'd be. Pugs not so much. You kind of had to type it really didn't work. And in addition to all of this, 11.1 brings something incredibly uniquely tantalizing. Drive. No, not that drive, but well, actually, yeah, kind of similar actually. Yeah, that's right. First you got dragon riding, get ready for goblin riding. A dynamic ground mount in the form of your very own pimped out ride, and yes, you can drift, which will basically make world questing in this area feel like you're in a Need for Speed Underground free roam mode. So what can we tell at this early stage about Drive? You'll get your own car, you'll pimp it out, customize the decals, the engine. Do you want more acceleration? Do you want a higher top speed? Do you want more drift? All things you'll be able to tinker with. Now, I say dynamic ground mount in the sense that one of the main things on people's minds right now, or at least mine, is whether or not this is a similar testing phase to what dragon riding was in Dragonflight. Of course, with Dragonflight, Blizzard went, here you go, have dynamic flying. But it wasn't just chucked at us for no reason, it completely tied in with the theme of the expansion itself. And Dragonflight ended up being the testing ground to iron out the creases and work on bringing it around for the next expansion as simply just an evergreen feature, which is exactly what happened. It's now just called Skyriding, and isn't just exclusive anymore to your Dragonflight dragon mount. You can ride any old mount now this way. Obviously, if you compare the scope of Drive and dragon riding was a much more integral feature of Dragonflight than Drive is to the War Within. Dragon riding was the primary way of traversing everywhere throughout Dragonflight and was synonymous with the entire theme of the expansion in general, whereas Drive is this niche, gimmicky goblin themed feature, very much localized to this one area 2 patches into the expansion. So given how much more extensive playtime dragon riding as a feature got by the end of Dragonflight, compared to how much we'll traverse with Drive by the end of the War Within, it would be fair to say that if we'd had dragon riding taken away from us come the War Within, that would have felt a hell of a lot worse than how it would feel if Drive gets taken away from us come midnight. That said, I do hope, despite the differences in scope and impact between these two dynamic travel features, Blizzard does finally find a way to bring it forward as an evergreen feature. And I know what you're going to say, Fieldy, you haven't even seen it yet, let alone played it. And yeah, I know, you're right. But you know what? It might be a little early, but any innovation into what are now quite archaic methods of exploration in this game is always welcome. Although I'm not quite sure how you'd get a horse to drift, or even what that would look like. That would require some vision. But hey, I'm sure they'll find a way. We'll also get to align with a goblin cartel of our choice, which will be akin to the packs in Ashgahet, not the Shadowlands covenants. Relax. Breathe. But as exciting as this all looks, there is a section of the player base that is wondering how all this whimsical, almost gimmicky goblin content even fits into the story, and how it's related to Xal'atath and her quest to royally fuck us all over. Blizzard has seemed to infer that it's something that the goblins are trying to mine and excavate. I think that's like Elementium or whatever, don't quote me on that, I'm not a lore buff. But however it fits into the story, it obviously will. So just, as long as it plays well, just enjoy it. I don't know about you, but I need a break from all these elemental old stone cavern raids. Like, yeah, they've been fun, but after getting them all through Dragonflight and in the beginning of the War Within, like, I need a break. Yes, give me big, vibrant, sprawling pink pleasure palace and robot demolition derby. I mean, how often do we get these sort of environments? Just go with it. Have faith, we'll be back fighting off the void in traditional cavern star raids before you know it. Just enjoy it. Another reason why I'm optimistic about this zone is mainly due to the fact that we're going back to the norm where a new zone comes out and we actually can't fly. And let me just explain why before you bite my fucking head off. With a bit of context involving past expansions, which addresses a greater recurring issue that I hope Undermined will fix. And I think it will fix, so just stick with me here. Think back to Legion, BFA, Shadowlands, that era of borrowed power. A new zone would come out, such as Argus, Nazjatar, or Korthia. And it'd get stale real quick, and you'd soon no longer have any desire to go there, except Argus. Argus was goated. But it didn't matter if you wanted to go there or not. You had to go there. Your power progression in the game quite literally depended on it. Don't want to grind Argus this week? Fine. Less artifact power for you. Get left behind. Don't want to head to Nazjatar this week? Fine. Weaker Heart of Azeroth. Get left behind. Don't want to head to Korthia this week? Sure, fine. Don't upgrade your legendary. Get left behind and spend the week running around circles in Oribos. Then Dragonflight came out with its brand new philosophy, which, despite the irritatingly and glaringly obvious fact it took a whole mass exodus of players for Blizzard to finally realize they needed to implement it, was nevertheless welcomed with open arms. Your power progression was no longer entirely contingent on how many world quests you've knocked out. Alts don't need to wait for weeks to get that right legendary before they're even viable for high-end content, let alone be optimal. And we could fly everywhere. The player base finally got exactly what it'd been asking for years. Patches that respected our time and sanity. So when the new zone for 10.1, Zaralek Cavern, got released, a zone that not only implemented technology within the engine we hadn't seen before by being entirely underground, yet still allowing us to seamlessly fly from above ground to the depths below with no loading screens whatsoever, but also a zone where we can now finally freely come and go as we please with no real pressure to milk the zone dry, smashing out every world quest in sight so you don't get benched for progression that week. It was sure to be a blast, right? I don't know what it was like for you guys on your server, but for me, within a matter of a week or two, Zaralek Cavern became a complete ghost town. But how could this be? This new zone finally implemented the formula we've all wanted for years. Or did we want it? At least did we want it to this extent? Aside from the fact that the Niffen weren't exactly the most awe-inspiring allies we've ever had to assist, the realization soon sunk in that now you don't need to be there, well then you might as well just not go there. Any time spent there helping the Niffen for pennies of a currency to go towards some mediocre-looking mount or transmog could be time spent pushing keys, pushing PvP rating, or doing other more meaningful competitive content. The zone alone and its optional nature highlighted the fact that it just wasn't engaging or rewarding enough on its own to merit spending time there. And as player numbers there dwindled, and with any journey there ending up feeling like a scene from 28 Days Later, this only made the incentive to go there even smaller than it already was. It soon became clear that, as much as we think we wanted it, a complete 180 on the power progression approach to zones might not have been exactly what we wanted, and rather what needed to be achieved was more of a middle ground. Yes, we don't want to be held hostage by zones with our viability in any competitive content being the collateral, but I'm also not willingly going to spend hours rebuilding this silly little town of moles for next to no reward. And while the Emerald Dreamer patch later did see a little bit more engagement, because it was a gorgeous zone in its own right, and there was a permanent rune waiting for you at the end of a renown track, which actually did help you in competitive content, I personally found myself having really no incentive to go there either. Except for occasionally doing the weekly tree walk, whatever that was called. I mean, that was kind of fun, I guess. And to bolster this claim, I mean, look at the Forbidden Reach. No, not Soren Isle, the other one, the first one. Which was just a small island with an incredibly short quest line that only got chucked at us for a 0.7 patch while we waited for the next season. And this zone actually turned out to be the one additional zone in Dragonflight which did provide something towards player power, which required you to really grind out the island to make the ring stronger. So what did the Forbidden Reach end up looking like? Now, as much as I think the lack of incentive and reward is the main reason for these zones not seeing as much player retention as previous zones, I also think the fact we were able to dragon ride in all of them was also to blame, which is going to lead me to my initial point which even started this segment, so just bear with me still. But Undermined will be better off for the fact that we can't fly. Like I mentioned earlier, I partly attribute the lack of desire to head to additional zones such as Zaralek Cavern to the sense of loneliness and solitude that you felt if you ever did decide to head there. This sense of solitude, I feel, was even further exacerbated by the fact you could fly there. If a zone has a bunch of players currently in it and they're all flying around, you're going to encounter them, or even see them for that matter, a whole lot less than if you're grounded. Because let's be honest, that's what the experience was, and still is in The War Within, with Kaz Algar. You fly in, swoop down onto a world quest you want to do, you do it, and then you take off again. You're spending most of your time in the air, during which, unless you're right up close to them, you're not going to be phased in or sharded in with other players. This won't be the case with Undermine. We're all grounded. Of course, with zones like Najatar and Korthia, we were grounded as well, but like I said, we didn't have a choice if we went there or not, and they weren't exactly exciting. Now, remember that middle ground I was talking about a minute ago? Don't hold us hostage in a zone with player power as blackmail, but at the same time give me an incentive to even go there. This is where Undermine comes in, and I think it's going to hit that middle ground nail right on the head. We don't have to go there, even if we want to time that plus 15 motherload. God, can you imagine even healing that? Jeez. But at the same time, we're going to want to be there. Cruising around in our whip, isn't it? I think that's what the kids say. I don't know, I heard it somewhere. In a zone that won't be smaller as a result of no flying because these cars go so damn fast. Player interactions will be in abundance because we're all together on the ground in this wacky metropolis, which is shaping up to seem like it's going to be a Need for Speed free roam / GTA 5 lobby. Yeah, that's right, we're getting GTA in WoW before GTA 6. You'll probably start seeing certain underground communities emerge that start holding illicit street racing and meetups. I mean, if Blizzard gets this right, Undermine may well just be the answer to the conundrum that's plagued the game for years. That is, finding that balance and finding the right way to get us into and keep us in the new zones. Yeah, I know what you're thinking, I'm huffing Major Copium, but I don't give a fuck because when it's sick, we all win. After 11.1 got its grand unveiling, Ian cheekily let us know there was one more surprise in store for us. And boy, was it a fitting finale.
No way. That player housing?
Yep, unless you've been living under a rock for the past week, perhaps in Zaralek Cavern. You'll know that player housing is finally coming to World of Warcraft. Dropping, it would seem, in midnight, although the roadmap does seem to indicate it's coming a lot sooner at the tail end of 2025, a good few months before midnight will probably even release. At least that's what we assumed, from this very obviously house-shaped Hearthstone icon, but of course not all were convinced, to the point Blizzard had to go and make it as abundantly obvious as possible. There were some interesting observations from the community though. Well-known data miner Ellie, known online as Keyboard Turner, shrewdly observed that the original icon with the Hearthstone and the parchment style art asset on which it rested on seemed to show the Hearthstone being placed directly on top of Northrend, as you could see the northeastern tip of the Broken Isles poking out from the bottom right of the parchment. This obviously quite understandably caused confusion, speculation that our house would be in Northrend for some weird reason, as it was clearly quite an intentional design choice. You could have just used a blank parchment art asset, like no one put a gun to your head and made you use that, like it was obviously for some sort of reason, right? However, we do know that houses aren't going to be exclusive to Northrend, as weird as that would have been, even though I'm 100% going to get a house in Grizzly Hills if I can anyway. As WoW content creator, guildie, and good chum of mine, Taliesin, managed to snag an interview with Ian himself and kicked off the interview, inevitably pressing him on player housing, trying to squeeze out any information we possibly can at this early stage on player housing, and inadvertently got Ian to blurt this out.
Peak video that we saw of it, it was very explicitly like a very cool Stormwindy Alliance-y house, which has obviously got some Horde players concerned. Can you confirm that that won't be the only option?
Yeah, there'll be more than Stormwind. And as always, with all features these days, again, without
No one said it was in Stormwind. That was just you, man. He said Stormwindy.
Yeah, I think I'll say this. Let's move on to other topics after this.
Good job, Tally. Textbook. But the fact of the matter is, we don't have any real information of player housing at this point, apart from the fact it's coming and Stormwind will be one of the places where we can set up shop, which actually conveniently answers one of my initial questions that popped into my head, being, will our house be available to a specific location of choice, like Stormwind, or would it just be a random, unspecified location in its own isolated dimension, a bit like how RuneScape did it back in the day? Think The Sims or something like that with its own plain geometric canvas. I mean, this would have been absolute garbage. And as much as I had confidence it would no way be that primitive, it was still nice to hear Ian confirm that it was tied to specific locations. But then the concern arises that, say it is tied to specific real-world locations, but only in one or two specified for us. A bit like garrisons were, where if you were Horde, your garrison was in Frostfire Ridge, and if you're Alliance, your garrison was in Shadowmoon Valley, and that was it. End of story. So in this case, Stormwind for Alliance and Orgrimmar for Horde. Again, I think this sort of limitation is unlikely, but an understandable concern to have. Our only reference point to what player housing could even look like in WoW is garrisons, and if Blizzard are smart, well, I mean, not smart, I mean, you just have to not be brain dead, they'll try and steer clear of what garrisons were as much as humanly possible. I think it's safe to assume that we will have a wide variety of locations to choose from. Now, you don't need to be a game dev to work out that obviously your own personal house is going to need to be instanced, at least in terms of the interior. But will the area in which the houses are and the exteriors of said houses be instanced as well? I mean, I like the idea of being able to walk down a random street in a city and see a row of houses that belong to players, giving the nice illusion that they just coexist organically within the living, breathing world, despite the interior, of course, being instanced. Final Fantasy XIV goes a step further with neither the exterior or the interior being instanced, really immersing you but providing its own set of problems too, which we'll get to in a sec. What both New World and Elder Scrolls Online do, which I think WoW will also need to do, is to allow multiple players to purchase a property in the same building, so like a little bit like an apartment block, which of course alleviates the inevitable problem of there being a finite amount of spots in desired areas, causing prices, or whatever we use to purchase our player house, I'm assuming it's going to be gold, to skyrocket, bit like real life. This is an issue that soon became evident in Final Fantasy XIV and really fucking got out of hand when the player base exploded after, well, you know, where although you had the true immersion of having one-off uninstanced plots of land strewn all over the map, not just in cities, but all over the map, that would just exist organically to everyone on the server, to the point where neighborhoods started to form, and Final Fantasy XIV servers ended up becoming typical American movie suburbia, with the inevitable downside that a finite amount of houses to go around caused a shortage, and houses became as hard to acquire in Final Fantasy XIV as they do here in London. Oh, for Christ's sake, I'm playing a fantasy game here. The whole point is I'm trying to escape this shit just for a little while. This route in WoW would end up being an absolute catastrophe, and I would just foresee the scenario where having to fork out real-life money for a WoW token to get in-game gold becomes harder to resist than ever before, just to get the house that you want. And as much as Blizzard I'm sure would revel in this, I think even they would realise the diminishing returns this would have overall for their revenue, when players soon realise that player housing, the feature they've been longing for years, ends up becoming a pay-to-win clusterfuck. Which is how it is, unfortunately, in Elder Scrolls Online. So despite Elder Scrolls Online not actually having the problem that Final Fantasy XIV did with a finite amount of spots, and actually alleviates that problem quite well by allowing an infinite amount of players to buy one building, still nevertheless allows you to bypass certain requirements to get the house and gold requirements by letting you just buy it on the store. I think it goes without saying that me and everyone else is praying that Blizzard decide not to go down this route, and I really don't think they will. Yeah, we'll probably see some cosmetics tied to the store, but yeah, I don't think they're that dumb. I also wonder that in the scenario that buying a house is still a relatively large gold sink, would there be certain factors that make purchasing certain properties in certain areas easier on the virtual wallet, like achievements or feats of strength that either unlock properties in certain areas or at least makes them more affordable, which would also give the player something to strive towards in-game. So, you know, win-win. Or perhaps racial biases. God, I'm so dodgy about the context of it being well. Where Blood Elves would get a discount on their very own shag pad in Silvermoon, or someone that has taken the time to grind rep to Exalted with the Tuskar would get a discount on their very own little igloo in the Azure Span. This kind of rep or renown discount is yet another system that New World has in place. Another question is, could player housing be a means to expand on crafting professions? For example, leatherworkers could craft one of the most obvious, almost cliche ornaments to go into a fantasy genre home: animal heads mounted on walls or animal pelt rugs, which could end up in a taxidermy skill tree being added to the leatherworking profession tab. Tailors could create more traditional style rugs, curtains, you name it. But just thinking about it now, like, if I think of any profession related to houses, like the first thing that comes to mind is, you know, the need for lumber, wood, chopping trees down, something that, you know, for some reason, albeit being a traditional skill in most fantasy games, it's something that Warcraft never really had, apart from RTS Warcraft and, you know, that little mini game. Could this be the perfect excuse to bring up wood cutting? I mean, with every player getting their own house, I mean, like, you're going to need a lot of lumber for that. I mean, of course, the houses are already going to be pre-built and you just purchase them. There's not going to be much kind of way for players to provide raw materials for the building of the house. But I don't know, man. Most furniture requires wood, and I imagine we're going to want a lot of furniture. So, you know, wood cutting and then a woodworking profession. Who knows? And as well as your own personal property, will there be the option for bigger guild-wide properties where you and all your guildies can hang out, which is something that Elder Scrolls Online does. Now, as cool as all these things sound, and as much as we would want player housing to really suck us in and give us incentives to engage with it, I think Blizzard will need to tread carefully as to not venture into territory where the housing system becomes too useful, giving us duplicates of what we'd see in a major city like an auction house or crafting tables. Because the more enticing it is just to stay in our house, and the more it becomes a default place to just hang out, the more likely, well, the main city hub becomes a ghost town and any social interactions and any feeling of a bustling, populated world is entirely lost. I mean, we got a taste of what that would be like the other week when a strange bug wasn't sharding anyone in with you in Donegal. And apart from the nice increase in frame rate, it was fucking horrible. Now, we've covered everything that was revealed to us, but there's still a lot on the 2025 roadmap that didn't even get touched upon in the direct. So let's just go through them now. So we got Warband UI updates, which sounds like we'll be getting new backgrounds for us to collect for our Warband login screen, which seemed inevitable in time, but you know, it's going to be fun to play around with when that does drop. 11.1.5 brings Horrific Visions Revisited, so a return of a little cool feature that we had in BFA, with void portals popping up all around the world, which we had to go and sort out, which was good fun. It took us to places that were largely irrelevant at the time. It felt nice at the end of BFA to be running around the voidy version of Pandora. It wasn't a place I thought I'd be going to at that point. So hopefully we'll get some interesting locations from old expansions that we haven't seen for a while this time round. 11.2 has exactly what you'd expect it to, so not a lot we can draw from that, except for the fact it doesn't seem to have any user. Oh, no, there we go. There's a zone. Cool. Cheers, Blizz. Guess that's all in order. Midnight's finally going to get its unveiling in summer, which I'd bet is probably just going to be a Gamescom announcement. 11.2.5 and 11.2.7, just generic language there. Nothing really significant or majorly exciting to draw from that. The player housing icon, which we already covered. And now, finally, this fell green bar at the tail end of the year. Yeah, you know it, I know it. It's Legion Remix. Now, if you watched my prediction video of a couple of weeks ago, this was one of my more out of left field predictions, which didn't have a lot of evidence behind it. And the reasoning I gave was because Illidan was just like plastered on the 5-day countdown for the event, which may or may not have even been relevant. But even if it wasn't, it doesn't even matter either way. I was right. The one and only Legion is coming to us winter 2025 in remix form, and honestly, I can't wait. I can't think of another expansion that I feel I'd want more to get the remix treatment. So in my prediction video when I predicted it, did I mention that I predicted Legion Remix? I had a feeling that Mott was this guinea pig to test remix, and Blizzard used it as an opportunity to gauge feedback, analyse how it played out, then go away, reflect on what went right, what certainly didn't go right, iron out the creases, and then bring it back, this time with a really good expansion like Legion. And this opens up questions such as how big a role will class-specific artifact weapons and class halls play this time around? Will we get to do the Mage Tower all over again? And if so, will this be another chance to finally get the Mage Tower artifact appearances for those few specs and classes that we didn't quite get to finish off before BFA dropped? Or will we get new rewards entirely, or recolors of the original Mage Tower appearances? We could go on all night, but the important thing is, I was right. It's coming, and it will be a nice distraction to keep us playing while we wait for Midnight to drop, just like Mott Remix was while we waited for the War Within. So that just about wraps up everything that's coming in 2025. Yeah, there's a lot to get through, but boy, what a year it's shaping up to be. Fingers crossed that it lives up to the hype, but I have faith, so we will see. But thanks for sticking around, guys. That was kind of a long one there. There was a lot to get through. If you like what you saw, like, sub, come join the squad, or catch me on Twitch doing, well, not these sort of things, but gameplay live. Come hang out. Links in the description, and also maybe there as well. But how do you feel about it all? Were you pleasantly surprised by the announcements at the direct, or were you a bit disappointed by things you didn't get? Out of the things we do know we're getting, what are you most excited about? What are you not most excited about? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear. But thanks for tuning in, guys, and until next time, as always, take care.